It's Tuesday on September 5th, and we're going to see what's happening in the world. And it definitely looks like a lot of things are happening in the world on this particular day. I know here in Durham, a lot of people are celebrating because of a major upset and all along those lines. Yeah, that's right. Duke managed to beat Clemson, a ninth-ranked team, and all of that. And it wasn't even a relatively close game. I think they won 28-7, if I'm remembering correctly, and all along those lines. It was actually interesting stepping outside on yesterday evening and seeing the Goodyear blimp up there watching the stadium games and all in that space. So I saw that when I was coming out of my apartment complex on yesterday afternoon. But to some more serious news, and there's a lot of more serious news in the world. And all along those lines, it looks like the Great Wall of China has been damaged by workers allegedly looking for a shortcut for their excavator. So apparently they have been detained for digging a shortcut through the Great Wall of China. And I do know that that is something that a lot of people consider one of the great wonders of the world and all along those lines. And of course, Ukraine, and I'm sure we'll be hearing more about this on the Russia-Ukraine show later on, has a defense minister that has resigned after Zelensky named a replacement. So that is what one of the things that is happening in the war. In addition to that, North Korea's Kim Jong-un may meet Putin in Russia to discuss an arms deal, even though the Kremlin is not saying whether they will confirm that summit or not. So that is one of the things that is going on. And apparently India is going out and changing their name. The India's Modi government replaced the country's name with Bharat in a G20 dinner invitation. So that is what they did in the invitation to those other world leaders. So maybe that is what they are planning to start going by instead of India and all along those lines. But that is what the dinner invitation says in all in that space. So it'll be interesting to see what folks have to say about that. And it looks like there is more news, of course, from Russia. It looks like Russia is saying that they have destroyed 4 Ukrainian military boats carrying troops in the Black Sea. And they are saying that they were U.S.-made military boats heading toward Crimea. And definitely that is one of the things that is going on. And, last week we talked about that worm that was in the person's body. Well, this time it looks like it's even something more scarier because a dinner plate sized surgical tool was discovered in a woman's abdomen 18 months after after her surgery and all of that, because it was found inside the woman's abdomen after a cesarean birth in New Zealand. So that is a long time to be traveling around with that in your body. And I can imagine that was only causing all kinds of discomfort and all along those lines. Um, Chinese spy agency is suggesting that a Biden-G meeting hinges on sincerity. So they're saying that that could be something that could be coming around if we're going to be having sincere talks. And I'm not sure what their definition of sincere talks are, but we'll find out from others as well. And members of the ASEAN, which is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, are meeting in Jakarta. So I'm sure that they will be having various conversations about what's going on in that part of the world with China and other people that are there as well. Definitely, it looks like there are even some folks that are trying to figure out how to address the Myanmar crisis that is going on in that area as well. So that is something that we're seeing in the news, and I'm sure there'll be others that'll be out there as well. And the EU has confirmed that an official from Sweden has been detained in Iran. So that is something else that is going on in the world, and India apparently is clearing sums in New Delhi as the meeting of the G20 is growing near and all in that space. So I do know that sometimes when there are major events, whether it is the Olympics or whether it is a summit, they will oftentimes try to clear out the sites that they don't want people to see, whether that is in the United States or whether that is in India or whether that is in some of the other places that these things have happened. I think that there was something similar during the World Cup there in Qatar, if I'm remembering correctly, and all along those lines. And Japan has announced emergency relief for seafood exporters hit by China's ban over Fukushima water. So that is something that is going on, and they are to allocate 140 million more to help the fisheries after the China's import ban and all along those lines. So that's definitely something that we're going to see more of in the news later on. And the Hong Kong's top court tells government to create legal recognition for same-sex partnership. So that is something that is going on. Different countries have different views about those kind of relationships, but apparently they're in Hong Kong. They are saying that the Hong Kong's top court has ruled in favor of the legal recognition for same-sex partnerships in that space. And climate change is fueling the there's folks that are saying that invasive species are causing hundreds of billions in economic damage. So that is something that we are seeing. So from toads to bugs, UN says invasive species are rising at an unprecedented rate, and that these kind of species are costing the global economy something like 39 billion per year and all along those lines. So that is definitely a lot of money that is going in that space and all along those lines. And in Africa, Gabon's new transitional president has been sworn in to replace Ali Bongo. So definitely Bryce Ngoma has been sworn in as the president, and that is less than a week after the military seized control and all along those lines. And the Chandrayaan-3 rover and lander is in sleep mode, but it might wake up later this month. And that is the India's lunar rover that just recently completed a walk on the moon surface in less than 2 weeks after its historic launch. And torrential rains are following the summer wildfires over there in Greece. And definitely that is some of the things that we are seeing in the news. And also Putin and Erdogan may be having a meeting showcasing cooperation, but little progress on a grain deal. And definitely that is just some of the things that I am seeing in the news. And definitely there might be some other things that other folks have recognized. I'm going to bring them in and see what they're talking about as well. By the way, deadly floods are tearing through central Spain after a torrential rainfall, and a boy was rescued from the floodwaters in Spain after clinging to a tree for 8 hours. So that is a long time to be hanging in there, but he did manage to get rescued. And South Korean teachers hold mass protests after there was a suicide in that area, and that has sparked protests against parent bullies in South Korea. So that is something that is going on, the whole notion of bullies, not just there in South Korea, but in the United States as well. As a matter of fact, we have a whole show revolving around that is on Sundays, which is Where's the Love, hosted by Stephanie Hockenhall and her son, Gene Smith. So that is one of the shows that airs regularly, and they oftentimes, because the show is focusing on bullying, deals around that as well. And definitely, I was going to hope that Shaquille was here, because I did see that there was some major good news in that space and along those lines, because I saw that Australia mounted a rescue of an ill Antarctic worker with icebreakers and a helicopter. So a complex rescue mission to save workers needing medical care at an Antarctic research station. And of course, it was a perilous, icy mission, but they did manage to rescue those sick workers in the Antarctica and all along those lines. So we might get to some other news in a little bit, but I'm going to bring in Lee Newt Rhodes. He's my partner in crime today, and I see that I've got Nick here as well. So we'll see if Nick joins the discussion, if anybody else pops in as well. But all kinds of things are happening in the news, Lee, even stuff around climate change, because apparently hundreds of millions of dollars have been pledged for African carbon credits at a climate summit. And the Kenya's leader has said climate change is eating away Africa's GDP and calls for talks on a global carbon tax. So that is something that we're seeing that folks in Africa are paying attention to. And I know that oftentimes in this show, we talk about human trafficking, and apparently Cuba has uncovered human trafficking of Cubans to fight for Russia in Ukraine. So Cuba uncovers a network trafficking Cubans to fight for Russia in Ukraine. And I guess that they are definitely fighting against that, not wanting their folks to go over there. And Taiwan president is leaving for a visit to the last African ally, Eswatini, and definitely going mid pressure from Beijing, but they're not expecting friction with China over the Taiwanese president visit and all along those lines.
Good morning, Nick. Mark, you brought up climate change and carbon offsets and stuff like that. Nick, can you explain what's a carbon offset?
Well, the whole idea is that you buy credits for, let's say that you're producing a lot of carbon, like an airline industry that produces actually a lot of carbon. So what you do is you actually buy trees in.
Does that make sense? In other words, I think we should take care of the environment. So, you know, Nick is very clean. He picks up everything. So if Nick's my friend, I can litter between the two of us at zero.
Right. It's just a dumb idea. I mean, the thing is, the theory is that, well, if I'm going to...
It's not a dumb idea. It's a very good idea for very wealthy people to make money.
That's the whole point. That's a dumb idea because it only helps wealthy people. But if you think about it, they go, well, I'm an airline, I pollute. So to make amends and prayers, what I'll do is I'll buy and plant trees in Kansas. Really? You know, I mean...
As opposed to just not pollute so much.
Yeah, I mean, and it really doesn't address the problem, which is huge because it's worldwide and it's predominantly the United States.
That's my point.
The U.S. and China and India. I mean, the big countries are the ones that pollute the most, and that's just the way it is, you know. So I don't know how much effect it has, but what you're doing right now is you're feeling and seeing the effect with hurricanes spawning in the Caribbean, which they never did before. The heat waves that are higher than they've ever been. So you're just getting a nice little taste of the apple of the 8.5 billion people that pollute. Now, that's the real problem. In other words, when you have 8.5 billion people, imagine if you had 8.5 billion cows on the planet. That could be a serious problem. So, and it's a long-term problem. It doesn't address the short-term problems of the United States, which is our Social Security program going broke next decade, Medicare going broke this decade, the student loan issues that are out of control, where students are duped into.
Those are things we can control.
Those are all
things. I got a question for. I got a question for Sasha that actually involves finance and not necessarily Ukraine at this particular point. But I saw that OpenAI, which is a big thing, I think Jacoby and Steve were talking about that on yesterday, but their executive officer, Sam Altman, is the first person to get an Indonesian gold visa, because apparently the Southeastern Asia's largest economy is seeking to draw foreign investors. So are we going to see more folks that can afford it, like Sam Altman, going and getting this apparently gold visa and all along?
They do it quietly. That goes on to all countries for years. Mark, if you have the money, you get the honey, and you can come into the United States. You don't have the money, no honey. And then what you also have is you have discrimination based on where you're coming from. In other words, quotas. And the reason why the people at the border get stopped, they don't meet the quotas because we have quotas on people from Latin America, Mexico. Basically, people of color are quoted out, and everybody else is welcome. So that's kind of like the immigration policy of the United States. And then there's this big complaint, oh, they're trying to immigrate. Yeah, they're trying to get a job. Hello, like your ancestors did years ago. But our immigration policy is horrible, and it's built to stay that way. So
do we have one?
I don't think it's going to change.
Nick, do we have an immigration policy?
Yeah, it's keep Latin Americans out. And
no, I know, but currently it's the border.
Hey, but see, Lee, no one wants to admit the policy. The policy is this: if you're white and you're from Europe, you're welcome. If you're from anywhere else, you're not. That's the policy of America. Okay. So if we ever admit to that policy, then we're good to go. At least we know what's going on. But that's not what happens. Instead, there's all this, well, there's too many people coming in the borders, blah, 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 you know? And most people get in here, by the way, not through the borders. They come illegally because they get a visa into the United States.
And they overstay.
And then they extend their welcome. In other words, they don't leave. So we're not here really to address the problem. We're here to complain about it. You know, in other words,
Hey, Lee, I got a question for Lee based on something that I read yesterday and everything. I know yesterday we were talking about folks that decide to go for jobs that might be considered in the arts and maybe don't have as much quote unquote importance in society. And all along those lines, we were having that conversation with Jatovi yesterday. And I was just wondering, what's the average salary of an accountant? Because I looked it up, and the average salary of a professional dancer can range up there in a pretty decent amount. It's not a great amount, but I think it was like, I saw figures that range anywhere from 35 to 60,000. And I know that that's vast depending on what kind of dancer you are and where you're being a professional dancer. But I was just wondering what the average salary of a accountant was as well, because I was actually impressed with some of the salaries that some of the dancers were getting. Because like I said, one thing that I saw on salary.com was 37,353 as of July 25th, but the average salary in Texas is 36,708.
You know, I don't have a good answer for you right now on top of my head, but what I can answer you is it's enough to have justified a college degree in accounting.
Right. Yeah, and the thing is, the reason accountants get paid that much, Mark, is no one wants to do their job. Okay. In other words, it's a horrible job. You work long hours, you sweat, these long hours, and you deal with meticulous things. You make one minor error in a place that's tons of errors can be made, then people chew you out. So it's basically accounting is a horrible profession. And for that, you get paid. Now, here's another horrible profession, UAW. United Auto Workers sitting on a bloody assembly line. You know, they make over $120,000 a year. They average $132,000 a year. So why do they get paid so much? Because frankly, Mark, it's a horrible job to be on an assembly line and put little buckets together and things together. And they're protesting. They want to get paid more than $132,000. So they're going to get so the United Auto Workers, they're all pulling nice small six figures. But you have to look at it this way. It's a horrible job. Here's the reality in our life. The worse the job, the higher the pay. So if you get into a really bad job, you get paid a lot more than if you're looking for a good job. So look for a job that really sucks, and then you're going to get paid quite well for that. You know,
well, they're actually protesting.
I'm going to sit in a desk, push government paper, and get paid six figures. You know, and the government employees, and this is where Trump is right, but he didn't do anything. He should take the government payroll and slice it in half. In other words, just get rid of these people, or frankly, cut their salary and cake in half. And then, but I'm not sure what you're going to do. And then return the money, I guess, to the national debt, which is out of control. Now, UAW, I actually don't have any problem with it because it's a horrible job, you know, and the people that get paid horrible jobs should get paid more.
So I just want to know, protesting because also they're talking about cutting their pay because they got to change over the assembly lines because they're going from, the combustion engine to EVs, and that EV engine doesn't have as many parts as the combustion engine. And they're talking about cutting pay from $32 an hour to $16 an hour. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of problems right there.
Yeah. Well, also the thing is the union workers get paid a lot more than the non-union workers. Now, in the South, they keep saying, well, you got the right to work, which means basically you got the right to work, but not get paid. Let's just add that feature to it, because the fact is the union workers, and they showed this, union workers make $66 an hour on the assembly lines. The non-union workers at Toyota make $54 an hour. And remember your Tesla, all these guys that love Tesla. Oh, we love Tesla. Elon Musk pays them $45 an hour. He sucks when it comes to pay. So if you think about it, and I'm going to beat up Elon Musk and your friends in San Francisco. Let me see if anybody on our team is from San Francisco. No, they're not. Okay. The San Francisco sucker Elon Musk pays $45 an hour for his Tesla workers. The unions, they pay $66 an hour for Ford, General Motors, etc. So why are we worshiping Elon Musk?
But speaking of worship, but hold on a second. Speaking of worshiping places, I was looking up because there was an article that really fascinated me yesterday. It was actually a economic article, which I know Sasha will find interesting and everything. But it was where the places, if you are single, that you should probably either live at or not live at because they were expensive places to live and everything. Lee, I don't know how you're surviving there in New York because it was number 4 and all along those lines because they said that a single person in New York needed, I want to say it was something like $75,000. Yeah, $73,226 to survive there in the city of New York. But that wasn't the worst. The worst was actually a place that got devastated recently. So maybe the salaries will go down. But apparently you needed about over $110,000, $112,411 to be exact, to live in Hawaii. Because that's how much you needed if you were going to be a single person in Hawaii.
Places, Mark. Hawaii and New York are expensive. Get your pocketbook out big time to go park your car. I remember years ago I used to park. It was like $18 an hour to park a bloody car in New York.
Good morning, everybody.
So you don't park your car.
Mark, it amazes me that even in Manhattan, in prime real estate, you have projects there. People living in projects.
What? Well, projects are the only
Manhattan in prime real estate. There are projects over there. It amazes me that that's where they are located.
Yeah, well, I mean,
one of the other expensive places. Hey, Nick, you'll get a kick out of this. One of the other really expensive places is one that has some great universities and everything. But apparently, if you want to be a single person in Massachusetts, which is home to some of our Ivy Leagues, you need about $87,909 if you want to be a single person in that area, and you need $80,013 if you want to be a single person in California.
Boston's expensive. When I was teaching at Northeastern, I thought, oh no, they're going to force me to move to Boston, but they let me do everything online. And again, like studios for $4,000 a month. I mean, come on, your entire salary is eaten up by rent in Boston, New York, San Francisco. So we're in the great city of Durham, most of us. And by the way, shout out to Durham and the great Duke University.
I mentioned that earlier.
Clemson
great win. Great win.
There's Steve.
You guys, I just want to go ahead and I'm sorry I was late today. I wanted to just go through some issues real quickly. But congratulations, Duke. Welcome to World Edition. I'm Steve Rao. And just a couple things around the world. Very interesting. Kim Jong-un, North Korea's leader, is expected to meet with Premier Putin today in Russia. He's traveling an armored train, and they're going to meet in Vladivostok. And I'd like to get Sasha Starr's view on this meeting. And also, one of the Wagner Group generals has been seen in public for the first time, Sergei Sirvokin, a Russian general. And the other big news of the day is we've got Erdogan working trying to negotiate the grain deal with Ukraine, saying that, if Ukraine was allowed to export grain, across the Black Sea, they could do this by softening their negotiating stance. And Zimbabwe just reelected their president. But I guess we'll start with Kim Jong-un on not the most exciting for me for world peace, 2 meetings between these guys, huh? I'll start with you, Sasha. It's like Hitler meeting Stalin.
They never met, actually. They had a lot of admiration for each other, especially Stalin for Hitler. And Putin actually is using Hitler's playbook quite a bit. But I'm telling you that there are so many opinions of very highly placed and well-known people. One of them I would like to mention to you is John Mearsheimer, who is supposedly a father of real politics. So his calculations are as follows. Look, okay, let's not go into how the war started with Ukraine and Russia. Let's assume we are here, we are now, and what's going to happen? Okay, Russia by population outnumbers Ukraine 4-1. the artillery, Russian artillery, outnumbers Ukrainian 5-1 and most likely 10-1. So then, how Ukraine ever is going to win this war, or even to keep its territory, whatever it remains of its territory? My prediction is, he says, that Russia will crush Ukraine, will take most of its territory, and U.S. and the West have to run away from it because in order to sort of to be around, as he says. Well, I'm following him for quite some time. Of course, I disagree with his many positions, but I respect him as a scientist and historian and philosopher and whatever he might be. But this time, and he published it very recently, just a few days ago, this time I'm changing my opinion about him altogether. Simply because a man of his stature and his knowledge and experience, he doesn't count at all the ingenious effectiveness of Ukrainians that are using all resources available. He is underestimating the Western resolve to I would say crush Russia, but at least to make sure that in foreseeable future it will not attack Ukraine or any other countries. So there will be peace in Europe as it was for so many years. And he doesn't take that into account. He doesn't take into account the possibilities that Ukraine could overtake Crimea, not even this year, this month. And that spells the end of Putin's regime. He will not be able to justify to his cronies, his people, population, his oligarchs and elite and whatever they are, will not be able to justify Crimea, which in 2014 became integral part of the Russia, same as Vladivostok or St. Petersburg or Voronezh or any other Russian city. Crimea is Russia, period. Well, we'll see. We'll see very soon what's going to happen to Crimea. And finally, he's talking about that if Russia will start losing, they will for sure use a nuclear, tactical or whatever weapons. Putin was warned several times that if he will ever use tactical weapons in Ukraine, he will be killed. He will be a number one target. Simply, he will be killed. Not eliminated, by the way, but killed. So far, he's not using it. He wants to leave. He's young, 70 years old, wants to enjoy life a bit more. Okay?
Yeah. I mean, it's just scary, these two leaders. I'm going to go to, and then we'll talk about the Ukraine grain deal, but I'll go to Shaquille. I mean, Shaquille, what is your thought about these kind of dictators allying themselves with each other? Korea, Russia. Is it a kind of a new division of the world, obviously, between these democracies like U.S. and Great Britain and Europe, and then you've got Russia and North Korea. I mean, Turkey. Doesn't make me feel very comfortable about the world peace out there.
I mean, I hate to play the devil's advocate, and obviously I'm a vocal proponent of capitalism, free markets, and small government. But look, North Korea didn't just split from Korea. The South Korea and North Korea didn't just split for the fun of it, right? There were some serious issues, and I think that what Kim Jong-un and what his father had outlined was obviously popular, and I think their hearts were in the right places. They wanted to make sure that they had sovereignty. They didn't want to be dictated to by international powers, and they wanted to have alliances with their natural allies, and they wanted to, they rejected the idea of swallowing whole the socialist or communist or Marxist Leninist ideas in full, but they wanted to do it their way in North Korea. I think that we in the West have sat there and, you know, maybe made them out to be more of a scapegoat than they need to be. It's up to the North Koreans, ultimately, the people, to say what they want. We all sit here and say, well, you know, they're very oppressive, but equality is one of the, and individual sovereignty is one of the key components of North Korean political philosophy. We don't know that. One, because North Korea doesn't really tell us very much about what's going on in their country, and two, because we don't look at it very often. But I say this in the same light that I talk about the strengthening of the BRICS alliance and the expansion of the BRICS alliance. Yeah. What do we expect these countries to do? If we're not going to trade with North Korea, and if we're not going to interact with North Korea in a way that the North Koreans are happy with, why wouldn't they seek to interact and trade and form alliances with each other? So I think that makes sense. And much as I will probably get the ire of Sasha, technically speaking, Putin is not a dictator. Now, the political system in Russia may have all sorts of problems, but technically speaking, he was democratically elected in the system that they have over there. Lastly,
they don't have elections. They don't even call it's a referendum. There is only one person on a ballot. There is no opinion why one candidate is better than another. Because there is no elections. How you can call democratic country when there is no election?
Sasha, that's their system. And prior to this conflict in the Ukraine, the West and the rest of the world has sat back silently on the issue and has actually said that they're a democratic country. Now, I agree with you that there are some serious issues with that, but I don't think the West is in any position to now bemoan their political electoral system because they've invaded the Ukraine, whereas previously we sat back and said nothing. So I'm just going to say one last thing about North Korea, if I can. It's very interesting to me that we live in countries, and even, we'll forget about America for a moment, even Australia. We live in countries where we promote, equal rights, we promote healthcare, education, etc. When it comes to healthcare, there is woeful inadequacies in the funding of healthcare. Well, I actually do talk to people from both South and North Korea from time to time, and I can tell you that they don't have this idea that if you don't have enough money, you should be given the bare minimum amount of healthcare. That's not the idea they have. Whether they do it well or correctly or in line with the freedoms that we're used to, that's a different question. But I think that we should be careful about criticizing countries whose politics we don't know, whose histories we may not necessarily know, and whose histories we can't really understand because, one, we don't know their culture, and two, we don't really know how these things have developed over not just recent decades, but over the centuries. So that's what I'll say. I'm not as concerned about it, Steve, as I think you've alluded to. What I will say is it's our fault anyway. It's that these sorts of things are happening because we in the West are not actually expanding our diplomatic connections internationally. We're not expanding our trade routes internationally. We're not doing any of that. We're just being bullies. And we are basically in the West dictating to and exploiting the poor countries around us.
Nobody would play bullies with Russia if they wouldn't attack Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. Because even when they got Crimea and Donbass region enclaves, West accepted that and didn't start the war against Russia and didn't do much about it. And it was for 8 years they annexed Crimea, which is something not happened for 80 plus years in Europe. They got away with that. They got away with that, starting essentially the real war in Donbass region. They got away with that as well. So this is why it's not just to criticize Russia for what they've done, but also to make sure that they will not be rewarded for this aggressive foreign policy. By the way, about North Korea, I have only one comment, and South Korea just as well. Remember that before 1953, it was one country, Korea. Now they've been divided in 53 in two. The average height of South Koreans is 5 centimeters more than North Koreans. That's about it.
Sophie's question reminds me of.
That may well be the case, but that's not necessarily because of failure. I'm not here to defend North Korea, right? But that may not be a failure of the North Korean system of governance. It may be a failure of us because we've basically bullied them and annexed them away because we don't like what they do. And as for your comments about Russia, look, I agree with you that Russia certainly has gotten away, in your words, gotten away with a lot of things. But ultimately, how did they get away with it? They got away with it because of the absence of any sort of criticism from the West or any real criticism from the West. And
you just said that it's not good to criticize the foreign countries. Right?
I didn't say that. No, I didn't say. I'm not going to do it. But I didn't say that we as West shouldn't criticize and shouldn't involve ourselves, even if it's diplomatically, in these sorts of issues. And the thing with Russia and the current situation with Russia and the Ukraine is not something that just happened overnight, as you well know. And the European Union did nothing at all to stem what was clearly the heightening of tensions in that area for a number of years now. Neither did the United States. And then Australia jumps up, for example. My country jumps up and says, oh, we're going to sanction Russian trades. That represents less than 0.01% of the trade that our country does. What's the point of doing that? That was just us sucking up to America. Nothing's really happening other than America sending money over there. I mean, I think that this is indicative of our failure, not their strength and not their success.
But what do you consider doing something? Are we talking military-wise? I mean, diplomatic or sanctions are diplomacy. So if that, I mean, and that's been going on for a while because there's always been criticism of how the Russian government is and how Putin is, been the dictator there forever, or the leader there forever. So, I mean, what outside of sanctions are you talking about that other countries could have done to push back, but not criticize, as you're saying, the other government, but diplomatically criticize the government? I'm just confused as to what you're trying to say we could have done that you see we could have done.
Well, I'll give you an example. In relation to North Korea, the North Koreans, whether we believe it's right or wrong, have decided to create this type of government, okay, and this type of system of governance. We, as a result, say, well, that's not right. You shouldn't do that. So we're not going to trade with you, and we're going to annex you from the world. Really?
No, but I'm asking
why
what
are we so correct in our views?
But I'm asking what we could have done other than economic sanctions, not trading, without anything diplomatically, without actually dropping in bombs, because you're not.
I'm saying to you, Jacoby, that I don't think that we should be economically sanctioning countries because we don't agree with their politics.
But
okay.
What I'm asking is what we should do, not what we shouldn't.
I believe that we should be trying to strengthen our relationships with all countries, even those whose politics we don't agree with, increase our trade with them, and encourage them to look at becoming more liberal in our eyes if they so choose. Let them know that they are going to be economically better off by becoming more respected in the international community because we have a lot to offer them, rather than trying to punish them when they don't do things the way that we want them to do. In the same way.
How do you do that without holding them accountable for the things that they're doing? It sounds like you're just saying, okay, well, we have to stay and play nice and keep playing nice regardless what you do. So
I don't think it's up to us, Chitobi. I don't
so
think
you're
it's up
saying
to
we
us.
can't do anything then?
That's not what I said. I don't think it's up to us to sit there and say, we need to hold you accountable for the things that you do. It's not our place, I don't think, to do that. You asked me the question last week about Uganda. What right, what possible right but does the international community have to withhold vital funding from that country because we don't agree with a political position or a law that they have?
So how do you hold, we'll even take Uganda. How do you hold Uganda accountable is my question.
Accountable to whom?
So we don't. So
they are a sovereign nation.
So then, in other words, what you're telling me is that you don't hold anybody accountable. You just continue pushing whatever they do and allowing them to do whatever they want to do, regardless of what. If right now we're on the screen, if we're both giving money to Mark, I disagree with what Mark is doing. And you continue to give him, regardless of whatever. Mark could have killed 50 families. I say, I don't like that. So Mark, we can no longer do business. You say, okay, I can't criticize Mark. I'm going to try and teach Mark a better way by giving him more money. How does who's holding them accountable?
That's not what I'm saying. But what the problem is that you're going to try and tell me, based on the analogy that you're using, you're going to tell me that I can't have any kind of functional trade relationship with Mark because you are trying to hold Mark accountable for something that you perceive to be wrong. I am saying to you that these countries are sovereign nations. They have their democratic processes. Most of them do, some don't. But we'll talk about Uganda. Uganda and most African countries have a democratic process. Are we going to sit there and say to them, we are going to, in the West, usurp the sovereignty of your electorates by dictating to you what your domestic policy needs to be in order to hold you to account by the moral standards that we now have in our country that we didn't have, by the way, 50 years ago.
But my question to you,
we didn't have those policies 100 years ago, but now that we have them, we are going to...
My question to you is, you keep saying that nobody does anything, nobody's held Russia accountable, and nobody holds these people accountable. How do you hold them accountable? You're telling me that you can't.
I didn't say anything about holding them accountable.
You're saying that we didn't criticize Russia or we didn't say anything bad to Russia.
Nigel Farage, for example, in his many, many comments and criticisms of the EU, said that the EU needs to stop poking the bear in relation to Russia over the Ukraine and its potential increase in trade and its increase in closeness to Europe. We know that most Ukrainians wanted to have a closer relationship with Europe, but the Russians were expressing some concern about the way that Russians were treated over there and some of the conflicts in some limited areas of the Ukraine. What did the EU do? They did nothing. They continued to buy oil from Russia by the billions. And then what they did was they continued to encourage the Ukraine to increase its position with the European Union. And this has contributed to what is now a catastrophic military situation
we
for
get
both
that.
Ukrainians and Russians.
But what I'm saying to you, what would you have recommended to stop it? Because it sounds like the EU did exactly as you're saying. They kept buying oil. They didn't do economic sanctions. They kept buying grain. They didn't do economic sanctions. They kept doing what they were doing. What I'm asking you is what should have changed?
Jacoby, I'm not sure how else to.
Well, I think before we go to the next issue, this is an interesting debate. But I think what Jacoby is saying is, if you look at the history of the world, there has to be at some point where we stand up to atrocities that are going on. Let's assume, Shaquille, that we go with your thesis, okay? If the United States, perhaps it would have changed if we weren't attacked by Japan. But would it have been okay for us to say, well, we're just going to let Hitler do whatever he can? If he's exterminating Jewish people in concentration camps, what is it our right to tell some ruthless dictator to commit genocide? But we said, no, he is a tyrant. And Churchill didn't listen to Neville Chamberlain and Lord Halifax. And we went in there and we got him. And we crushed Hitler. and World War II was won.
Steve, hold on a second. Steve, hold on a second. One of the things that I'm hearing Shaquille say, and I'm just
well, maybe Shaquille has a point. I'm just trying to clarify.
Hold on a second. I'm trying to figure out things as well. Because one of the things I'm hearing you say, and it's a cliche-ish statement and everything, but it is very much a true statement. And I think that Shaquille would agree with me that what we consider one man's dictator is another man's freedom fighter. So that being said, is like, how do we like, there are certain things that we know are heinous crimes for most people. Most people would agree that apartheid was not a great thing for South Africa, and it was a very racist policy.
But Mark, even then, you're contradicting yourself. You're contradicting your own statement when you even said that. When you said we know apartheid was bad, according to the logic that you're trying to justify from Shaq, then somebody else may have thought it was good. So we shouldn't tell those people that we think apartheid is bad, but they think apartheid is good. So we should have let that go. That is what Steve was talking about.
I'm not even going to bother responding to that, because that is clearly not what I said. But I'm not even going to respond to you twisting and turning the things I say. So Steve, to your point about Hitler, look, obviously in that situation, yes, we needed to intervene. The problem is that intervention into other areas of the world is inconsistent, firstly. Secondly, the reason why these situations escalate to this point in the first place is because of an apathy and because of a reluctance to do anything in the first place, or because we seek to take the moral high ground. Germany did not just become this sort of Nazi-run place overnight. Again, after World War I, Germany was left economically devastated. The Germans were made to feel continually that they were lesser than human beings than everybody else. And this obviously angered and upset the Germans. And eventually, after feeling that they were discriminated against, after feeling as though they didn't have enough, people who were workers that wanted to have more, that felt that they deserved more, ended up becoming, infatuated by an ideal that history well knows was a horrible ideal. But this did not happen overnight. And this is really the same thing with our treatment of other countries around the world, where we have got now in the West, we currently have 1/3 almost of the world's economy under sanction. In the absence of any proof or any idea that that's actually working, what are we going to do next? We either have to be prepared to compromise with these countries and to try to negotiate with them to get better ideals, or we have to sit back and accept that they are going to trade with each other. We're not going to militarily intervene with their peaceful trade with each other. So what are we going to do? We're just going to sit here and say, oh, well, look, how terrible is it that all these countries are trading with each other? Or as Republican senators have recently been bemoaning about China, that China is the competitor and the adversary of the United States. Really? What do you want the Chinese to do exactly? Are they supposed to sit there and say, well, we're not going to continue to export our goods. We're not going to continue to try to expand our diplomatic arrangements around the world, not because it's in our self-interest, but we're going to stop because America might get upset. Of course, no country's going to do that, especially a country that is increasing its power and influence in the world, such as China. No world leader's going to do that. So what standard are we trying to hold these countries to, that we sit there and say, well, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, but after you don't do it, we're not going to help you. We're not going to do anything at all. We've had Africa. The West has gone into Africa decades and centuries ago. What help is Africa getting right now? There's enormous conflict in Nigeria. There's enormous conflict in South Africa right now. Most of Africa, the 1.3 billion people or whatever it is that live in the 56 countries of Africa, are struggling, a lot of them, just to survive. Okay, the West has gone in there and taken their mineral resources, taken their wealth, taken their people and enslaved them. What are we doing to help Africa?
Shaquille, Shaquille, you can go on and on forever. There is a very simple issue. Right now, most of the African countries are suffering because of lack of grain. That grain is available in Ukraine. Ukraine wants to ship that grain to Africa. Russia blockades Ukrainian ports and threatening to destroy any ship that is taking grain from Ukraine and going to any other countries in Africa or elsewhere. How you can confront that when the Ukraine ports that have plenty of grains to ship, they are blockaded by Russia. Say, oh, Russia, yeah, you have right to blockade our ports, yeah? Okay, next you'll blockade San Francisco port, maybe New York. Okay, listen, we're not going to say anything. We know your great power. You know about power system. There were two great power systems during the Cold War. One was headed by NATO, US, and another one by Soviet Union, okay? Now, in 1991, Soviet Union, no more. There is no country today, Soviet Union. Done, gone. So there is no more two systems, two power rulers. There is one. It's United States, it's Western Europe, it's NATO. All the rest of the world have to follow that one power system. Now, if they don't want to do that, that creates imbalance of power. Then the supreme power has to defend its right to rule. And if cannot, then say, sorry, okay, we are no longer the power. You can do this, you can blockade Ukraine. You can do anything what you want. Thank you, bye. Okay, you have to make a decision. What is your future?
We're just going to continue to do what we've already been doing that didn't work. You can look at any region of the world, take the Pacific Islands. You can go to the Pacific Islands and say, what investment has there been from powerhouse countries like Australia, which is a powerhouse in this region? What investments have been done over there? What have we done to help those people? What are we doing to improve the conditions of the Pacific Islands? And what is the United States doing? Well, we're not doing very much. So China comes in and says, hey, we're going to increase our trade routes. And then we sit there in the West and go, oh, my goodness, how dare you? How could you possibly do that? This is not an issue that these countries are doing the wrong thing by their own national interest. This is an issue that our politicians and our governments have let us down. This is our fault. This is a failure of the West. This is what is creating this problem.
Hey, just really quickly along those.
Actually, I have one point to make, though, that's really, before we get to a final, we didn't get to some of the other issues today. We'd like to talk about the Ukraine grain deal and Turkey. But one thing that I think Shaquille has made, one thing that he's made me think about is there's a good book, the original book by Fareed Zakaria called The Post-American World. And it talks about how for almost since the end of World War II, there's been a post-American order that rules-based international systems would be accepted and that the United States was the dominant power in the world. But now his theory is it's called Rise of the Rest, where other countries like China and North Korea, they want to have their chance of saying, well, look, we're the best, you know, and perhaps they're using dictatorship as a way to say, look, we want to focus on our economy, our country, play on nationalism to say, look, we want to be great again. We want to be number one. And maybe that's what's happened is that the world is now dividing into these areas that want to be the best, that the rise of the rest. And I really think Fareed is onto something there because
I hear what you're saying, but one of the questions that comes with that, and it's one of the things I was going to bring up as well, is that there are a number of other entities, namely corporations, and a lot of them are multinationals and everything that aren't exactly rushing to leave Russia. I mean, there are some that have left. I mean, Heineken just recently sold their entire franchise, well, part of their franchise for like $1 and all along those lines. But definitely there are a number of them that are still staying in Russia. So do we need to put some pressure, to come back to Jatovi's questions, on those firms that are still there, or do we leave them alone? Because there are a number of firms that are Western based that still have offices in Russia. So what do we do with those companies that are Western based? And if anybody's got any thoughts, please let me know, because I think that that's part of one of the other elephants in the room, is that there's some other Western companies that still have offices in Russia, and they're not exactly rushing to leave out. I understand that Russia is putting some pressure on them and putting some financial limitations on them that make it harder for them to leave, but they're still stuck in that area.
It's very simple. To open congressional hearings on these companies and bankrupt all of them, and just they can continue to operate in Russia as Russian companies, but just here in US and Europe, bankrupt them mercilessly.
Well, ironically, you're talking about how Russia is trying to stop them from leaving via economically.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Those are punishments to stop them from moving. It's the same thing that we're trying to say that we shouldn't do to other countries for changing their morals or changing their ideas so we can partner and negotiate and work with them. So we know economic sanctions work, but just as what Steve points out with the rise of the rest, there are other powerhouses that are growing at other economic entities or economic groupings from China to India. Those powerhouses are starting to grow, which takes away in a sense, it equalizes that power. So negotiations and everything else.
We know that economic sanctions work. On what basis? The highest percentage growth levels have been in countries that have been under economic sanctions. So on what basis do you form the opinion that these are working? And the very fact that the BRICS nations and others are forming alliances and increasing their GDP, increasing their trade, how do we come to the conclusion that that's working? And if we're, by the way, not prepared to take military action to intervene in other countries, which there doesn't seem to be much appetite for at the moment, if we're not prepared to do that, we stick a sanction on, and that doesn't work, what are we supposed to do? Just sit there and just go, oh, well, we'll just whinge about it and watch these countries get more powerful and then complain?
Shakil, it's not a matter of appetite. I think it's a matter of the fact that Pentagon has $1 trillion thereabouts military budget. Now, if U.S. is not prepared to enter any fighting anywhere and doesn't have appetite for that, then cut the budget in 2/3.
Let me ask you
Only 1/3 is left, and
let me ask you this,
more than enough.
I've said that we need to do more to try to harmonise and increase our relationships with other countries, most especially referring to the ones that we don't get along with. There seems to be a lot of pushback against that from the panelists. What would you guys propose that we do? And if you're going to say sanctions, we've already got a third of the world under sanction, that's clearly not giving us the desired result. We are already talking about the potential displacement of the US dollar. I don't really think the US dollar will go away, but we're certainly talking about the lessening of its power and influence around the world. We know that our diplomatic credentials around the world are under pressure. What exactly is the idea that you guys have other than let's just do more of the same?
Shakil, I agree with you that sanctions are not working as expected because a lot of even Western companies, they are staying to continue to work in Russia, or they find the ways how to go around sanctions or so on. I agree with that. However, they're still working its way slowly, but surely they damage big time the Russian economy, that's for sure. However, what to do next? Give Ukrainians all required weapons to finish off the war with Russia. Ukrainians are not going to enter Moscow or Russian territory, no. They want to kick all Russian invaders from the Ukrainian territory. I don't understand why that's so difficult.
My question to you is not how to solve the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. My question is, across all of the countries, the 1/3 of the countries that we currently have, the 1/3 of the world's economy that we currently have under sanction, if we know that this is not working, if we can already see that, and nobody likes what I've said, which is that we need to increase our relationships, we need to negotiate more with these countries, and we need to try to do something. What is the idea that the people on the panel have?
Shakil, you take one thing at a time. First, finish the war with Russia and Ukraine.
That's not the only conflict.
Number one. Number two, once that's happened, that many countries will understand who is the actual real power in the world. The West and US will be respected, and it will be so easy to conduct the foreign policy in any part of the world. Failing that, U.S. will become a secondary power, and there is no justification for $1 trillion budget. And that's Shakil, I know your question is different. I know what you're expecting us to say. To get back, U.S. get back.
No, I'm not saying for the U.S. to get back.
You're fine. Then what do you expect to hear, Shaquille?
Exactly.
I got an answer for you.
These aren't
I've got solutions. Just like I wrote down.
Has a conflict.
Hold on a
with
second.
the
Hold on a
United
second.
States.
We have a
Russia,
show in about 1 minute on Russia, China, Ukraine.
Yeah, what's the
Hold on a
solution?
second. Hold on a
I've got
second.
See you guys
We've
tomorrow.
got another
Thank you
show
all.
starting.
Wonderful show, guys. We'll talk to you tomorrow. It's been a great edition of World Edition. Talk to you tomorrow. Looking forward to seeing Sasha's show, and I'm hoping to join there myself eventually. Thank you all so much. Be safe wherever you are. Another great edition, and the world is changing and very engaging, productive discussion. We'll catch up on some of world issues tomorrow. Be safe wherever you are. This is Steve Rao signing off on September 5th, 2003. Thank you all so much.
Take
Bye-bye.
care.